Hi there. So I finished the game of Lords of the Spanish Main, and it resulted in a rather resounding victory for this player, even though he did not have his starting unit, Francis Drake, on the board. He ended up with the Buccaneer King. Actually, he should have one less, shouldn't he? He's gone down a size. So I actually ran out of money because people started loading up. I was getting fantastic incomes of like 8, 10, 11 income a year at the end, and which was looking good because before that it was sort of 4, 3 and stuff like that, which meant that Sir Francis Drake player who took an early lead with 2 of the treasure chest, which gives 50 gold. It looked like he was going to get away with the game. He also had 50 gold, but he was being punished by everyone a lot, so he couldn't ever sort of gain much more than that. So it started to look like Der Ketter could begin to catch up. And if we had gone on, we reached about there's 13 years left. 14 years left, 13 years left to play for. Well, 14, but the game ended on the event card. So the final results were 50 gold for the French Buccaneers there, 55 gold for the Hacendado, 80 gold for Der Ketter, the Duke Ketter, and 116 for Francis Drake. Now, after I finished the game, I realised I'd made a mistake. I'd had a few cat attacks, and I realised now that there's actually one extra tent, gold tent on the board. I think it might be his, but I can't remember, because essentially what happened is we could have 4 gold tents come out in each each decade. And we had 4 come out here, we had 4 come out here, and then in these last 2 they didn't come out at all, because there was basically, because of the Mordidas these 2 had, there was basically warfare against the Casa de la Contrazione. So that's what allows you to apportion the flotta, and at both times that was disrupted in the year of the flotta before that could go out, because skullduggery happens in high to low. Oh no, so that should have gone out first. Yeah, so that was it. It was just disrupted the year before, so it wasn't available for skullduggery in the year it came out, which meant that we missed 2 treasure fleets, and so he was being denied, and he could have caught up with his income increasing. Essentially what happened, I played the last bit out because I just played a decade and a half last night, and it goes so much quicker when you're not filming it. So I just wanted to sort of bring it to resolution, because I'd had it sitting here for quite a long time and couldn't get to it for one reason or other, or at least couldn't get to it where I could film it. So essentially what was happening in the last part of the game was the Duke Ketter, he had a Mordida which enabled him to disrupt French enterprises. So the French fleets and or colonies here, I can't remember which, he did it twice, were completely disrupted. So that took this fellow out of the game. Now this one, because his Mordida was taken, and he never really recovered from when he got all these plagues, and he recovered a bit, but then nobody would trade with him. So he just wasn't gaining anything, and he didn't get a fleet. He didn't have the money to get a fleet, and so he until very close to the end of the game, and so he couldn't trade with himself and bring himself back into the game, so he couldn't get gold, so he couldn't bid on Mordidas and etc., so he just couldn't bring himself back in. So it was mainly sort of a tit for tat between these 2, with a lot riding on what income they had, so depending on if they could buy, say, the next Mordida card, especially because they were using Mordidas to disrupt things which often disrupted the Mordida. And so, for example, Drake was disrupted using the English Civil War card towards the end, and he came out and he was actually bought by Duke Ketter. So this player, that although that's his starting, you would think he'd need that. He doesn't actually. He could still carry on. He was doing a bit of trading, and he had he had a mill on here. He was getting a lot of income from that. But then this fellow tried to get back in the game. He had a mordida where he could disrupt a mill, and he has mordidas where he can disrupt. He can destroy forts, and so then these very precious, high value colonies could be disrupted, which also the Duke had as well. And so he was doing a bit of bribery. He took 10 gold off him not to hit him, and then he took 10 and said, I'll hit the other one. Then he took 10 gold off him not to hit him, and he did honour it because he thought they might gang up against him, but it just didn't give him enough time to get back in the game, although he did pull out of a long fallback. He was going to be a definite loser, but as it was, he was vying for third place with the Hacendado there. So that's the end of a exciting and fun-filled game. It was especially for these two players in the last decade and a half. It was really about them two, and then him managing to bring himself back in after he was knocked out by the Duke. He managed to bring himself back in towards the end, but for this player it must have been quite a boring. It takes about an hour to play a decade if you're not filming it, and if you have players that are moving reasonably fast, players that are not dragging their heels essentially. But even that last decade and a bit was a bit boring for this guy. There wasn't anything he could really do, so he was just hanging on for a crumb that might fall his way. For instance, if these two they were bidding ridiculous sums on these mordida cards, like 30 gold at one point. I believe one went for at least 25, bidding against each other to get the ability, so that they would be the one ending up with a Casa di la Contrazione and awarding themselves the gold floaters. So there was crazy bidding going on, and so sometimes they both had no. I think there was a point where they had no gold each for bidding on one or two turns, and he had just managed to get 2 gold, which gave him a fleet, and so he was dragging himself back in. And if we had gone all the way to the end, if the event card hadn't come out, there's a chance that he could have been in the running, depending on essentially what the outcome of the battle between these two. So and it's similar for this guy, though he had a bit more play still in him. He wasn't waiting quite as much in the wings as this fellow. So these two had a sort of a less exciting game, although they're still in with a chance. And Drake went ahead with an early lead, so it was up to this fellow to try and stop him. That was the exciting battle. So this guy kind of had a kingmaker ability, and he was favouring this fellow for a while, but because he had to spend so much money on certain bids, that brought his total down, and the rally player, the Drake player, ended up with the final win. So there it is, Lords of the Spanish Main. Great game. I hope if you've watched through, it's given you a good idea of how much fun this game is, playing out these kind of with all these historical events intervening in this far-flung place.